The coffee was still in the air when the room went silent.
Everyone,
Not
please
the kind
calm
of
down.
silence
Calm
that
down,
comes
look at
from
my
shock.
shirt.
The kind that comes from fear. A billionaire's daughter stood in the center of a cafe screaming at a waitress whose hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the tray she dropped. The girl was young, maybe 19, dressed in designer clothes that cost more than the waitress made in 6 months. And she was loud, threatening lawsuits, threatening jobs, threatening everything people with money threaten when they believe the world belongs to them. The waitress didn't fight back. She just stood there with her head down, apologizing in a voice so quiet it barely counted as sound. No one intervened. No one ever does. But in the back corner of the cafe, a man sat perfectly still. Korean. Early 30s. Expensive suit that didn't match the neighborhood. And beside him, a K9. Black. Trained. Watching. The dog's ears went up first. Then its body shifted. Not aggressive. Alert. The kind of alert that means something dangerous just entered the equation. The man didn't move. Didn't speak. Just watched the billionaire's daughter scream at a woman who'd already survived more than this entitled girl would ever understand. And that's when people started noticing him. Started whispering. Started realizing that the most powerful person in the room wasn't the one screaming. Subscribe right now. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. Because what happens in the next 25 minutes will show you that power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just waits. And when it moves, the room empties. It happened at exactly 9:47 on a Thursday morning in a cafe that had been serving the same neighborhood for 12 years. The kind of place where regulars knew each other's orders, and the owner remembered birthdays, and the coffee was decent enough that people came back even though there were 3 Starbucks within walking distance. The morning rush was winding down. Business professionals heading back to offices. Students settling in with laptops. Elderly couples reading newspapers over toast and jam. Everything ordinary. Everything predictable. Until the tray fell. The sound of ceramic shattering cut through conversation like a gunshot. Coffee exploded across white tile in a pattern that would have been beautiful if it wasn't a disaster. 3 cups. 2 lattes and a cappuccino. All hitting the ground simultaneously because the waitress carrying them had tripped over something she didn't see coming. Her body went forward. Arms windmilling. Tray sailing. She hit the ground hard, knees cracking against tile, palms scraping, the kind of fall that hurt in ways you'd feel for days. The coffee splashed. Hot liquid arcing through air in slow motion, catching light from the windows, landing across expensive leather boots that had probably never been worn in weather that might actually require boots. And that's when the screaming started. Do you have any idea what you just did? The voice was shrill, furious, belonging to a young woman who'd shot up from her seat like she'd been electrocuted. Do you have any idea how much these cost? The waitress was already apologizing. Already on her knees. Already grabbing napkins from the nearest table with hands that shook so violently the napkins kept slipping through her fingers. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, I'll clean it up. I'll pay for the dry cleaning. I'm so sorry. But the girl wasn't listening. She was circling the waitress like a predator who'd found wounded prey, pointing at the boots, at the coffee stains spreading across hand-stitched leather, at the destruction of something that mattered more to her than the person currently bleeding from scraped palms. These are custom. Do you understand that? Custom. You can't just replace these. You probably don't make enough in a year to replace these. The cafe had gone completely silent. Conversations dying mid-sentence. Newspapers lowering. Laptops forgotten. Everyone watching. No one intervening. Because this was the kind of scene people witnessed but didn't participate in. The kind of scene where getting involved meant becoming a target. Where safety meant staying quiet and being grateful it wasn't happening to you. The waitress kept apologizing. Kept cleaning. Kept trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed with napkins and desperate apologies. And in the back corner, a man who'd been reading something on his phone set it down slowly. His eyes tracked the scene with the kind of attention most people reserved for threats. Calm. Assessing. Absolute. The K9 beside him had gone completely still. Not sleeping still. Hunting still. Ears forward. Body coiled. Eyes locked on the young woman who was now threatening to have the waitress fired, deported, destroyed in every way money and connections could destroy someone. The dog didn't growl, didn't move, just watched, waiting for a command that hadn't come yet. The man reached down without looking, rested one hand on the dog's head. A silent message. Not yet. The dog's muscles relaxed fractionally, but its attention never wavered. And slowly, inevitably, other people in the cafe started noticing the man in the corner. Started noticing the way he sat, the way he watched, the way something about him felt wrong in a way that made survival instincts start screaming. Minseo Park learned about invisibility the same way most immigrants learned about it. Through necessity, through survival, through the painful understanding that being seen meant being vulnerable in ways that could cost you everything. She'd come to America 7 years ago with her younger brother, Ji-hoon. Their parents had died in a car accident on a rainy Tuesday in Seoul. A delivery truck running a red light. Their father's reflexes not fast enough. Their mother dying on impact. Their father lasting 3 days in ICU before his injuries became too much. Minseo was 21. Ji-hoon was 14. They had an uncle in Los Angeles who'd agreed to sponsor them. Agreed to help them start over in a country where everything was supposed to be possible, if you just worked hard enough. The uncle lasted 6 months before deciding 2 grieving kids were more responsibility than he'd signed up for. He didn't abandon them exactly. Just made it clear they were on their own. Found them a room in a house full of other immigrants. Helped Minseo get her first job cleaning offices. Then stopped answering her calls. Minseo took 3 jobs that first year. Cleaning offices from midnight to 6 in the morning. Stocking shelves at a grocery store from 7 to noon. Waitressing from 1 to 9 at whatever restaurant would hire someone whose English was still struggling. She slept 4 hours a night. Sometimes less. Learned to function on caffeine and adrenaline. And the kind of determination that came from knowing there was no safety net. That if she failed, her brother failed. That if she gave up, there was no one else coming. Ji-hoon was the smart one. Had always been the smart one. Even back in Seoul, teachers had pulled their parents aside to say he was special, gifted, the kind of student who could go anywhere if given the chance. Minseo held on to that, made it the center of everything. If she could just keep them afloat long enough, if she could just make enough money for him to focus on school, then maybe this whole terrible thing would have a point. Maybe their parents' death wouldn't be the end of everything, just the worst middle part before things got better. She learned to be invisible because visibility was expensive. Because being noticed meant questions. Questions about work authorization. About legal status. About whether she had the right permits for all the jobs she was working. Questions she couldn't afford to answer incorrectly. So she kept her head down. Never argued with customers even when they were wrong. Never complained about hours even when they were illegal. Never pushed back against managers who shorted her tips or made her work through breaks or treated her like she was lucky to be tolerated. Being invisible meant being safe. Being safe meant her brother could stay in school. That was the only math that mattered. This cafe was her middle job. The one that fit between the morning grocery shift and the evening restaurant shift. She'd been here 8 months. The owner was decent enough. Didn't ask too many questions. Paid on time. Let her pick up extra hours when she needed them. The regular customers mostly ignored her, which was exactly what she wanted. Just another immigrant waitress. Interchangeable. Forgettable. Invisible. She'd been carrying a tray with 2 lattes and a cappuccino to a table by the window when it happened. She didn't see the leg. Didn't see the expensive boot stuck out just far enough to catch her shin. Just felt the impact. Felt herself going forward. Felt the tray leaving her hands. Felt the ground coming up fast and hard. The coffee burned where it splashed across her wrists. The tile scraped skin from her palms. Her knee hit something sharp, maybe broken ceramic, and she felt warm blood immediately. But the physical pain wasn't what made her chest tight. It was the fear. The immediate, overwhelming understanding that this was going to cost her. That customers didn't trip for no reason. That someone had done this deliberately. That she was about to be blamed for something that wasn't her fault, and there was nothing she could do except apologize and hope it didn't get worse. So that's what she did. apologized. Over and over. In English that suddenly felt clumsy and inadequate. While her hands shook and her knee bled, and a girl young enough to be her little sister screamed about boots that cost more than Mincio made in 3 months. She didn't look up. Didn't make eye contact. Didn't do anything that might be interpreted as defiance. Just kept her head down and tried to become even more invisible than usual. Tried to shrink into the floor. Tried to make this stop being her fault. Tried to survive the next 5 minutes so she could still have a job in 6. Jennifer Huang woke up that morning in a bedroom larger than most people's apartments and immediately wanted to go back to sleep. Not because she was tired. Because being awake meant facing another day of a life that had stopped making sense 3 weeks, 4 days, and approximately 6 hours ago. That's when Marcus had ended their engagement. Marcus Chun. Heir to Chun Industries. Perfect resume. Perfect pedigree. Perfect match according to both their fathers who'd arranged the whole thing like a business merger, because that's exactly what it was. They'd been together for 2 years. Engaged for 8 months. The wedding was supposed to be in June. Lavish. Published in magazines. The kind of event that got covered in society pages and generated the kind of photos families hung in hallways for generations. Jennifer had told herself she loved him. Or could love him eventually. Or at least could build a comfortable life with him, which was close enough to love when you factored in financial security and social positioning, and the kind of future her father demanded she build. Then Marcus had met someone at a charity function. A teacher. Elementary school. Someone who wore clothes from department stores and drove a 10-year-old Honda, and had never heard of half the designers Jennifer's closet was full of. Someone normal. Someone who apparently made Marcus laugh in ways Jennifer never had. Someone who wanted him instead of wanting what he represented. He'd ended it kindly. Apologetically. Explaining that he couldn't marry someone he didn't actually love just because it made financial sense. That he was sorry. That she deserved better. That this wasn't about her being inadequate. It was about him finally being honest. Jennifer had smiled. Told him she understood. Wished him well. Then gone home and destroyed $6,000 worth of dishes in a rage that left her hands bleeding and her throat raw from screaming. Her father's reaction had been worse than the breakup. He hadn't comforted her. Hadn't asked if she was okay. Just launched immediately into damage control. How this looked. Who needed to be called. What story they'd tell. How quickly she needed to be seen with someone new so people didn't think she'd been rejected. Didn't think she was damaged goods. She tried to tell him she needed time. Needed space to process. Needed maybe 5 minutes to be sad about the fact that a relationship she'd invested 2 years in had evaporated. He told her sadness was a luxury. That their family's reputation mattered more than her feelings. That she needed to remember who she was and act accordingly. Jennifer was the only child of Charles Huang. Real estate mogul. Self-made billionaire. The kind of man who'd immigrated to America with $300 and built an empire through ruthlessness, calculation, and an absolute unwillingness to accept failure in any form. He'd raised Jennifer the same way. Taught her that weakness was unacceptable. That image was everything. That problems disappeared if you had enough money and knew where to apply pressure. He'd never been warm. Never been affectionate. But he'd been present. Demanding. Pushing her to be better, stronger, more successful. She'd spent her entire life trying to earn his approval. Trying to become someone he could be proud of instead of just someone he tolerated. It never worked. Nothing was ever enough. Every achievement came with criticism about what she could have done better. Every success was immediately followed by questions about what she was going to accomplish next. She'd developed anxiety at 16. Started taking pills for it at 17. By 19 she was mixing medications in ways her doctor definitely didn't approve of just to get through the day without falling apart. Her father called it dramatics. Told her to handle her problems privately. To stop embarrassing him with weakness. The breakup had made everything worse. She'd stopped sleeping. Started taking more pills. Started drinking more. Started feeling like she was disappearing into a version of herself she didn't recognize and didn't particularly like. This morning she'd woken up to 17 missed calls from her father. Messages demanding to know why she hadn't attended the dinner he'd arranged with the Lee family. Why she was avoiding his calls. Why she insisted on making his life more difficult than it needed to be. She'd ignored all of them. Gotten dressed in clothes that cost more than most people's rent. Driven to a cafe far from her usual neighborhood specifically because no one would recognize her there. She wanted 20 minutes of anonymity. 20 minutes where she could sit in a place that didn't expect anything from her. Didn't demand performance or image, or the constant exhausting maintenance of being Charles Huang's daughter. She'd been sitting by the window drinking mediocre coffee, and trying not to think about Marcus with his new girlfriend when the waitress tripped. When coffee splashed across her boots. When something small and stupid became the thing she could finally control. Kangdae Choi had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous people were the ones nobody saw coming. The ones who looked like businessmen. Like lawyers. Like anyone except what they actually were. He'd built his reputation on being underestimated. On walking into rooms where people made assumptions based on his age, his appearance, his apparent civility. Then learning too late that assumptions were expensive in his world. He was 33 years old and controlled more of Seoul's underground economy than most people controlled their own checking accounts. Not through violence, though violence was always an option. Through information. Through relationships. Through understanding that power was a network, not a weapon. He owned businesses. Legal ones that made real money and employed real people. Restaurants. Property management companies. Import-export operations. All legitimate. All profitable. All useful for moving money and creating leverage and maintaining the kind of influence that didn't require anyone to die. But he also owned other things. Information networks. Protection services. The kind of operations that existed in the spaces between legal and illegal, where law enforcement looked the other way as long as nobody got too loud about it. He'd come to Los Angeles 6 months ago because his network was expanding. Because American cities represented opportunities Seoul couldn't offer anymore. Because sometimes building an empire meant knowing when to diversify. The K9 beside him was named Shadow. 3-year-old Belgian Malinois. Trained for protection, detection, and the kind of controlled aggression that could stop threats before they became problems. Kangdae had gotten him 2 years ago from a trainer who specialized in military and police contracts. Shadow wasn't a pet. He was a partner. A weapon that breathed and thought, and could make decisions faster than any human could react. They'd been driving through this neighborhood when Shadow had gotten restless. The dog needed a break. Kangdae needed coffee. This cafe was as good as any. He'd walked in, ordered an Americano, and sat in the back corner because sitting with your back to the door was how you died in his profession. He'd been reading reports on his phone when the crash happened. The coffee. The screaming. The girl who clearly had money and no idea how to use it properly. He'd watched it unfold with the kind of detached attention he usually reserved for business negotiations. Assessing. Calculating. Determining whether this was something he needed to care about. Then he'd seen the waitress. Really seen her. The way she held herself. The way she apologized like apologizing was the only defense she had. The way she kept her head down and her voice quiet, and her entire body language screaming that she was trying to disappear. And he'd seen his sister. Not literally. His sister was dead. Had been dead for 11 years. But the posture was the same. The fear was the same. The understanding that being powerless meant accepting whatever happened to you was the same. His sister's name had been Minji. She'd been 16 when their parents died. Kangdae had been 19. Old enough to make choices. Young enough to make terrible ones. Their parents had run a small restaurant in Seoul. Good food. Decent location. Enough money to get by but never enough to get ahead. When they died, carbon monoxide leak from a faulty heating system. Kangdae and Minji had inherited debt. The restaurant. The apartment above it. Medical bills from the attempted resuscitation. Funeral costs. All of it drowning them before they'd had time to grieve. Kangdae had done what he had to do. Borrowed money from people who didn't loan money to teenagers unless they were desperate. Worked for those same people. Started with collections. Moved to enforcement. Discovered he was good at it. Good at reading people. Good at knowing when to push and when to back off. Good at the kind of violence that solved problems without creating bigger ones. He'd kept Minji separate from it. Told. her to focus on school. Told her he was doing consulting work, which was technically true if you counted consulting on how to make people pay debts they didn't want to pay. She'd been smart, top of her class, planning to study nursing, planning to help people, planning to be everything good that Kangdae was sacrificing his own goodness to protect. She'd worked part-time to help with expenses, waitressing, retail, the kind of job students worked. The kind of jobs where customers felt entitled to treat you however they wanted, because you were just service, just invisible, just there to make their experience better regardless of what it cost you. One night she'd been closing the restaurant where she worked when 3 men came in, drunk, aggressive, looking for entertainment that didn't care about consent. She'd fought back. One of them had pushed her. She'd hit her head on the corner of a prep table, fractured skull, intracranial bleeding, dead before the ambulance arrived. The men were sons of families with money, with connections, with lawyers who made witnesses forget what they'd seen and made evidence disappear, and made the whole thing go away like it had never happened, like Minji had never mattered. Kangdae had handled it quietly, the way he handled everything. All 3 men died within 6 months. Different methods, different circumstances. Nothing that could be traced back to him. But anyone who knew. And the message was clear. Touch his family and money wouldn't save you. But Minji was still dead. And all the revenge in the world didn't change that. He'd made himself a promise standing at her grave. Never again. Not if he could stop it. Not if he was in the room. Not if he had the power to make it different. So when he saw the waitress on her knees apologizing for something that clearly wasn't her fault while a rich girl screamed about boots, he didn't move immediately. He just watched. And remembered. And waited for the exact right moment to make everyone in this cafe understand that the most dangerous person in the room wasn't the one with money. It was the one who understood that power came from knowing when to use it. The cafe had that particular tension that came from witnessing something uncomfortable, but not quite dramatic enough to justify leaving. People were watching, pretending not to watch, glancing up from phones and laptops and newspapers to track the scene playing out near the counter. No one intervened. No one ever did. Because intervening meant becoming involved, meant potentially becoming a target, meant risking your own peace for someone else's crisis. The waitress was still on her knees, still cleaning, still apologizing in a voice that had gotten quieter, smaller, like she was trying to disappear into the floor. The coffee had spread across white tile in a pattern that would stain. The broken ceramic was everywhere. Small sharp pieces that would probably be finding their way into shoe treads for days. And Jennifer was still screaming. Had moved from the boots to the dress that had gotten splashed. To the fact that her entire morning was ruined. To threats about calling her father, calling her lawyers, calling whoever needed to be called to make this waitress understand there were consequences for incompetence. The cafe owner had emerged from behind the counter. A middle-aged Korean man who'd run this place for over a decade. Who knew most of his regular customers by name. Who prided himself on maintaining a peaceful environment. He was trying to de-escalate. Offering apologies. Offering to cover dry cleaning. Offering a refund and free coffee for a week. Offering anything that might make this stop. Jennifer wasn't listening. Wasn't interested in solutions. Was interested in making someone pay for the fact that her life felt out of control. And this was the one situation where she had power. Where she could demand accountability. Where someone had to listen to her. That's when the dynamic started shifting. Subtly at first. The couple by the window gathering their things. Not rushing. Just quietly deciding this wasn't somewhere they wanted to be anymore. A businessman who'd been on a conference call suddenly wrapping it up. Making excuses. Heading for the door. A college student packing up their laptop with hands that had started shaking slightly. At first it seemed random. Just people finishing their coffee and leaving. But then it became a pattern. Person after person finding reasons to exit. Glancing at the back corner as they did. And that's when Jennifer finally noticed him. The man who hadn't moved. Who sat perfectly still with a dog that looked like it could tear through steel. And a face that showed absolutely nothing. For a second their eyes met. Jennifer felt something cold slide down her spine. Not fear exactly. More like recognition. The way prey recognized predator. The way weakness recognized strength. She opened her mouth to say something. To ask if he had a problem. To assert dominance the way her father had taught her. But before she could speak, someone's phone rang. A customer near the door. Middle-aged woman. Business casual. She answered. Listened. Her eyes went to the man in the corner. Then to Jennifer. Then back to the man. She hung up. Stood. Walked out without finishing her breakfast. Another phone rang. Different customer. Same pattern. Look at the man. Look at Jennifer. Leave. Then another. And another. Within 5 minutes, the cafe had gone from moderately busy to nearly empty. Only Jennifer Mincio, the owner, and the man with the dog remained. The owner had gone pale. Was staring at the man in the corner with an expression somewhere between recognition and terror. He knew something. Something that made his hands shake as he pulled out his phone and started making a call he clearly didn't want to make. Jennifer felt the ground shifting beneath her. Felt the power dynamic changing in ways she didn't understand. She was used to being the most important person in a room. Used to her name carrying weight. Used to people scrambling to accommodate her because of who her father was. But something was happening here that had nothing to do with her father. Something that made everyone who knew what it was decide very quickly that they needed to be somewhere else. The man still hadn't moved. Was still watching. And Shadow, the K9, had its eyes locked on Jennifer in a way that made her skin prickle. Not aggressive. Just absolutely, perfectly focused. Like she was a target that had been designated but not yet engaged. Jennifer took a step back. Then another. Found herself backing away from a threat she couldn't name. From power she couldn't see but could absolutely feel. And for the first time in her life, she understood what it was like to be powerless. To be standing in a room where your money meant nothing. Where your name meant nothing. Where the only thing that mattered was that you'd caught the attention of someone who operated on frequencies you didn't have access to. The man set down his coffee cup. Slowly. Deliberately. The sound of ceramic on table rang out like a gunshot in the silence. And that's when Jennifer finally understood. This wasn't about the coffee anymore. Kangdae stood up slowly. Not dramatically. Just the natural movement of someone who'd been sitting and decided it was time to stand. But everything about it commanded attention. Shadow rose with him, moving like liquid, every muscle visible beneath sleek black fur. The dog's attention never left Jennifer. Never wavered. Just maintained that perfect, predatory focus that made it very clear who was being tracked. Kangdae walked forward. 3 steps. 4. Stopped about 10 feet from where Jennifer stood. Close enough to make his presence impossible to ignore. Far enough to not be technically threatening. The cafe owner had abandoned his phone call. Was just standing there watching with the expression of someone witnessing a car accident in slow motion. Jennifer tried to speak. Found her throat had gone dry. Managed to get out a sentence that sounded much less confident than she'd intended. Do you have a problem? Kangdae didn't answer immediately. Just looked at her. Really looked. The way you'd look at a problem you were deciding how to solve. Then he looked at Mincio. Still on the floor. Still cleaning. Still trying to become invisible. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Conversational. The kind of tone you'd use discussing weather or traffic. Are you finished? Jennifer blinked. What? Are you finished screaming at someone who was just doing her job? The question hung in the air. Simple. Devastating. Jennifer felt her face flush. She what? Screaming? I wasn't screaming. I was just, you were screaming. He said it matter-of-factly. Without judgment. Just stating an observable truth. And now I'm asking if you're finished. Jennifer's defenses kicked in. Anger replacing fear. Who the hell do you think you are? Kangdae didn't react to the question. Didn't answer it. Just asked another one. Did she trip you? What? Did she trip you? Or did you trip her? Jennifer's mouth opened. Closed. The truth was stuck somewhere between her brain and her voice. Stuck behind years of being taught that admitting fault was weakness. That backing down meant losing. That power meant never having to say you were wrong. She spilled coffee on me. That's not what I asked. His voice was still quiet. Still calm. But there was something underneath it now. Something cold and absolute that made Jennifer's heart rate spike. I asked if she tripped you, or if you tripped her. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jennifer could feel everyone's eyes on her. The cafe owner. The waitress. This stranger who somehow knew exactly what had happened. She tried to salvage it. Tried to redirect. It doesn't matter. It matters. 3 words. No louder than before, but delivered with enough finality that Jennifer's sentence died in her throat. She looked at the waitress. Really looked at her for the first time. Saw the blood on her palms. The torn knee of her pants. The way she was still shaking. Saw what she'd done. What she'd chosen to do, because hurting someone felt better than sitting with her own hurt. Jennifer's anger crumbled. Replaced by something worse. Shame. I want to speak to the owner. She tried to sound authoritative. Tried to reclaim control. Kangdae glanced at the cafe owner who looked like he wanted to disappear. Then back at Jennifer. You're speaking to him. But he's not the person you need to talk to. Jennifer's voice went higher. Defensive. I have every right to. To what? Kangdae interrupted gently. To humiliate someone because you're having a bad day? To make someone afraid because you have money and they don't? To prove you have power by using it on someone who can't fight back? Each question landed like a physical blow. Jennifer felt tears threatening. Felt the careful shell she'd built around herself cracking. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. He took one step closer. Shadow moved with him, perfect synchronization. You're angry about something that has nothing to do with this woman. And you're taking it out on her because she's safe to hurt. Because she won't fight back. Because people like. You have been taught that's what people like her are for. Jennifer was crying now. Couldn't stop it. Couldn't hide it. Couldn't maintain the facade anymore. That's not. I didn't. Kangdae's expression didn't change. Didn't soften. But his next words were almost gentle. You did. And now you're going to fix it. Jennifer wiped her eyes. Found herself nodding. Agreeing. Not because she wanted to. Because something about this man made disagreeing feel impossible. The cafe owner cleared his throat. Voice shaking slightly. Sir, I should mention. This is Jennifer Huang. Charles Huang's daughter. He said it like it was supposed to mean something. Like it was supposed to change the equation. Kangdae didn't react. Didn't even acknowledge it. Just asked the owner a question that made the man's face go white. Who owns this building? The owner's voice was barely a whisper. I lease from a property management company. Which company? Sterling West Management, sir. Kangdae nodded slowly. Like he'd suspected as much. I know them. In fact, I bought their entire portfolio about 6 months ago. Including this building. The silence was absolute. Jennifer felt the last of her power evaporate. Her father's name meant nothing here. Her threats meant nothing. Because she was standing in a building owned by a man who clearly operated on a completely different level than she'd ever encountered. Kangdae looked at Minseo. Still on the floor. Still frozen. Stand up, please. His voice was gentle. Minseo looked up. Uncertain. Afraid this was a trap. Please. She stood slowly. Legs shaking. Hands still gripping torn napkins. Kangdae addressed the owner without looking away from Minseo. She gets the rest of the day off. With pay. The owner nodded frantically. Yes, sir. Absolutely. And I want a full report on my desk by tomorrow about workplace safety protocols. About training for handling difficult customers. About employee protection measures. Yes, sir. Of course, sir. Kangdae finally looked back at Jennifer and asked the question that would haunt her for weeks. Do you want this handled publicly or quietly? The question hung in the air like a blade. Jennifer didn't understand it at first. Didn't understand why the cafe owner looked like he might pass out, or why the few remaining customers had suddenly found urgent reasons to leave. She just knew that something fundamental had shifted. That this conversation had moved beyond coffee and boots into territory she didn't have maps for. What does that mean? Kangdae's expression didn't change. It means exactly what it sounds like. Public means cameras. Police reports. Lawsuits. Media coverage. Your name in articles about assault and harassment. Your father's company fielding questions about how his daughter treats service workers. Every society page that's ever covered you revisiting this incident. Your photo next to headlines about privilege and cruelty. Jennifer felt her stomach drop. That's, you can't. Or quiet. He continued like she hadn't spoken. Quiet means you apologize. Sincerely. You pay for her medical expenses. You make a donation to an immigrant workers' rights organization. You get therapy for whatever's actually wrong in your life. And you never, ever do something like this again. Jennifer's mind was racing. Trying to calculate. Trying to figure out if this was a bluff or a legitimate threat. Trying to understand who this man was that he could make those kinds of promises. You can't just. Yes, I can. He said it simply. Without arrogance. Just fact. I own the building. I have the security footage. I have witnesses. And I have resources your father's lawyers will find very difficult to navigate. Do you know who my father is? For the first time, Kangdae smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Yes. Charles Huang. Real estate development. Self-made billionaire. Immigrated in 1992 with $300 and a work ethic that destroyed everyone in his path. Built an empire on being more ruthless than his competition. Taught his daughter that power meant never having to apologize. Jennifer felt cold spreading through her chest. How do you? I know because knowing things is how I survive. He took another step forward. Shadow moved with him. Your father built his fortune in a world where money was the only power that mattered. But he made a mistake teaching you that money was the only power that existed. Jennifer wanted to run. Wanted to call her father. Wanted to make this stop happening. But she couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Could only stand there while this stranger dismantled everything she thought she understood about how the world worked. Kangdae's voice softened slightly. Not kind. Just less sharp. I'm going to give you a choice. A real one. Not the false choice between public destruction and private humiliation. A choice about what kind of person you want to become. Jennifer found her voice. Shaking. Small. What choice? You can keep being your father's daughter. Keep believing that hurting people is acceptable as long as you have enough money to make consequences disappear. Keep becoming someone who destroys others because you're being destroyed from the inside. Or, he paused. Let the word sit. Or you can decide that this is the moment you choose different. That this is where you stop repeating patterns. That this is where you start becoming someone you can actually live with. Tears were streaming down Jennifer's face now. She wasn't even trying to hide them anymore. I don't know how. Start by apologizing. To her. Kangdae gestured to Minseo. Sincerely. Not because I'm making you. Because you owe her that. Jennifer looked at the waitress. Saw her own cruelty reflected in the woman's fear. Saw what she'd become. Saw her father and herself and hated it. She walked forward slowly. Stopped in front of Minseo who flinched. I'm sorry. The words came out broken. I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve that. None of that. I was angry about things that have nothing to do with you and I took it out on you because I could and that's unforgivable. Minseo didn't say anything. Just stared at her with eyes that had learned not to trust apologies. Jennifer kept going. I'll pay for your medical expenses. For the dry cleaning. For whatever you need. And I'm going to get help. Real help. Because you're right. She looked at Kangdae. I'm becoming someone I don't recognize and I don't want to be this person. Kangdae watched her. Assessing. Then he reached into his jacket. Jennifer tensed, some instinct telling her to run. But he just pulled out a business card. Handed it to her. My therapist. She specializes in family trauma and anxiety disorders. Tell her I sent you. She'll make room in her schedule. Jennifer took the card with shaking hands. Why are you helping me? I'm not. He said it flatly. I'm trying to prevent you from destroying someone else, because your father destroyed you. There's a difference. He turned to the cafe owner who'd been standing frozen this entire time. Make sure she gets to her car safely. Then close for the day. Pay your staff for the full shift. Send me the receipts. Yes, sir. Kangdae looked at Minseo one last time. You deserve better than this. Better than this job. Better than this treatment. Better than a life where you have to make yourself invisible to survive. There's a business card in your locker. Call the number. We have positions opening that might interest you. Mencion's eyes went wide. Why would you? Because someone should have helped my sister. His voice went quiet, distant. And they didn't. So I help when I can. He turned and walked toward the door. Shadow followed. Jennifer stood there watching him leave. Watching power walk away. Watching authority exit without needing to prove itself. And understanding for the first time in her life that she'd never actually been powerful at all. She'd just been loud. The aftermath unfolded in ways Jennifer couldn't have predicted. She'd gone home. Sat in her car in the parking garage of her apartment building for 40 minutes trying to stop shaking. Finally called the number on the therapist's card. Made an appointment for the next day. When her father called that evening demanding to know where she'd been, why she'd missed another obligation, why she was making his life difficult, she did something she'd never done before. She told him no. Not rudely. Not dramatically. Just firmly. I can't do dinner this week, Dad. I have appointments. Appointments? What appointments? Therapy. He was silent for a long moment. Then his voice came back cold. Controlled. We've discussed this. Those kinds of admissions are private. They don't need to be public knowledge. I'm not making it public. I'm just telling you. Another silence. Then. This is about the boy, isn't it? The one who left you. Marcus. Her father never called him by name. Just the boy. Like he wasn't a person. Just a problem. This is about me, Dad. About the fact that I'm not okay and I haven't been okay for a long time, and pretending I am is making it worse. Her father's voice sharpened. Jennifer. You are a Huang. That means something. That means standards. That means not indulging weakness. I know what it means, Dad. And I think that's the problem. She hung up before he could respond. Turned off her phone. Sat in silence. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of her life. Her father was furious. Stopped taking her calls. Started making public appearances without her. Made it clear through relatives and family friends that she was an embarrassment. A disappointment. A failure. Her social circle fractured. Half the people she thought were friends turned out to be her father's connections who dropped her the moment his approval disappeared. The other half she realized she didn't actually like. Had never actually liked. Had just tolerated because that's what you did in their world. Therapy was brutal. Her therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, didn't let her hide behind explanations or excuses. Made her sit with uncomfortable truths. Made her examine patterns. Made her acknowledge that she'd been repeating her father's trauma, his ruthlessness, his belief that power meant domination. That she'd been taught love was transactional, and worth was measured in success. And showing vulnerability was the same as showing weakness. Dr. Kim asked questions Jennifer had never let herself consider. What do you want? Not what your father wants. Not what you think you should want. What do you actually want? Jennifer didn't have answers. Realized she'd never developed her own wants. Had just adopted her father's ambitions as her own, because that was easier than figuring out who she was separate from him. She started small. Stopped going to events she hated. Stopped pretending to enjoy things because they were expensive. Started trying activities her father would have mocked. Pottery class. Volunteering at a community center. Reading books that weren't about business or networking or success. She reached out to Mencio through the café. Left an envelope with money for medical expenses, dry cleaning, and a letter apologizing again. Mencio never responded. Jennifer didn't expect her to. Some harms didn't get forgiven. Just acknowledged. She saw Marcus one day at a coffee shop. With his new girlfriend. They looked happy. Actually happy. Not performing happiness. Not maintaining an image. Just genuinely enjoying each other. Jennifer waited for the jealousy. The anger. The sense of injustice. Instead she felt something like relief. Because looking at them, she realized she'd never wanted that relationship. Had never wanted him specifically. Had just wanted to check a box. Complete a requirement. Please her father. She approached them. Apologized for how things had ended. Wished them well. Meant it. The girlfriend was kind. Marcus was surprised but appreciative. They talked for a few minutes. Then Jennifer left. Felt lighter than she had in months. Her father eventually reached out. Through his lawyer. formal, cold, informing her that if she insisted on this path of self-destruction, she should understand there would be consequences. Her trust fund would be frozen. Her position in the family company would be reconsidered. Her allowance would be conditional on her returning to appropriate behavior. Jennifer read the letter 3 times, then called Dr. Kim. What do I do? What do you want to do? I want to tell him to go to hell. Dr. Kim's voice was careful. And is that what you actually want? Or is it what you think you should want because he's being controlling? Jennifer was quiet for a long time. I want to tell him I love him. And I'm grateful for everything he provided. But I can't keep destroying myself trying to earn approval. He's never going to give. I need to build a life that doesn't require his permission. Then tell him that. Jennifer did. Not over the phone. In person. In his office. With her father sitting behind a desk that costs more than most cars, looking at her like she was a problem he was calculating how to solve. She told him she understood he was disappointed. That she'd never be the daughter he wanted. That she was working on becoming someone she could live with, even if that person didn't meet his standards. He didn't respond. Didn't soften. Just told her the door was always open if she came to her senses. She left. And understood that some relationships were just permanently broken. That some parents couldn't love you the way you needed. That you could grieve that while still choosing yourself. 6 months later, Minseo's life looked different in small, significant ways. She'd called the number Kangdae had left. Nervous. Uncertain. Expecting it to be some kind of trick. Instead she'd gotten an interview at Sterling West Management. For an accounting position. Entry level. But with benefits. With normal hours. With the kind of stability she hadn't had since before her parents died. The interviewer had been professional. Hadn't asked about the cafe incident. Had just reviewed her qualifications, her education from Korea, her work history. Had offered her the job 3 days later. She'd taken it. Quit 2 of her 3 jobs. Kept the cafe part-time because the owner had apologized, had implemented new policies, had made it clear he valued her. And because she liked the regulars. Liked the rhythm of service work even if she didn't need to rely on it anymore. Her brother Ji-hoon had gotten into university. Full scholarship. Pyramid. He'd cried when he got the acceptance letter. Had told Minseo that everything she'd sacrificed had been worth it. She cried too. But privately. Later. When she was alone and could let herself feel the weight of 7 years, finally resulting in something that felt like forward motion. She saw Kangdae occasionally. He came into the cafe sometimes. Always sat in the back corner. Always had shadow with him. They'd nod to each other. Nothing more. She tried to thank him once. He'd waved it off. You don't owe me anything. You did the work. I just opened a door. But she did owe him. Not in a way that could be repaid. Just in the way you owe someone who sees you when you've been invisible so long you forgot you were worth seeing. Jennifer came into the cafe once. 3 months after the incident. Minseo saw her walk in. Felt her chest tighten. Prepared for confrontation. But Jennifer just approached quietly. Asked if they could talk. Minseo wanted to say no. Wanted to protect herself. But something about the way Jennifer looked, different, softer, less sharp around the edges, made her agree. They sat at a corner table. Jennifer apologized again. Not performatively. Just honestly. I was wrong. I hurt you because I was hurting and that's not an excuse. I've been working on myself. Therapy. Real changes. And I wanted you to know I'm sorry. Not because I expect forgiveness. Just because you deserve to hear it. Minseo listened. Didn't forgive her. Forgiveness felt too big. Too generous. But she acknowledged it. Thank you for saying that. They talked for a few more minutes. Carefully. Like 2 people learning a language neither was fluent in. Then Jennifer left. Minseo didn't think they'd be friends. Didn't think she could trust someone who'd shown her that much cruelty. But she thought maybe Jennifer was becoming someone different. Someone better. And that was enough. Kangdae never asked for gratitude. Never checked in. Never made his intervention into something that required ongoing acknowledgement. He just continued existing in his corner of the world, running his businesses, building his empire, helping when he could in ways people didn't always see coming. Shadow stayed by his side. Perfect partner. Perfect protection. One evening late, when the cafe was almost empty, Mincio brought Kangdae a coffee he hadn't ordered. Set it down. Hesitated. Your sister. She would be proud of what you've become. Kangdae looked up. Something flickered across his face. Not quite pain. Not quite peace. Just acknowledgement. No, she wouldn't. I've done things she'd hate. Become someone she'd be afraid of. But maybe she'd understand why. Mincio nodded. Sometimes the best we can do is be the person we needed when we were breaking. He smiled slightly. That's better phrasing than my therapist uses. You have a therapist? Everyone who survives trauma should. They talked for a few more minutes. About healing. About carrying the past. About making different choices even when the broken parts don't fully fix. Then Mincio went back to work. And Kangdae sat in his corner with Shadow. Both of them. Watching. Both of them remembering. Both of them understanding that some wounds don't close. They just become part of who you are. And sometimes that's enough. Months became a year. Mincio got promoted. Moved into a better apartment. Brought Ji-hoon to visit the cafe and introduced him to the owner, who'd given her a chance when she needed it most. Ji-hoon was thriving. Making friends. Joining study groups. Becoming the kind of young man their parents would have been proud of. Jennifer continued therapy. Started volunteering. Cut contact with her father entirely after he made it clear he'd rather have no daughter than one who embarrassed him. Started building a life that didn't require his approval or his money. Got a job at a non-profit. Modest salary. Actual purpose. Actual meaning. Kangdae expanded his operations. Quiet. Methodical. Building networks across cities. Helping when he could in ways that didn't require recognition. Keeping promises to a sister who'd never know he was keeping them. And Shadow stayed by his side. Perfect. Loyal. Unwavering. The cafe continued serving coffee. Continued being a small constant in a neighborhood that was always changing. People came and went. Stories unfolded and resolved. Lives intersected briefly then diverged. And in the back corner, a man with a dog occasionally sat and watched. Making sure that when violence happened in his presence, when power tried to crush powerlessness, when cruelty tried to disguise itself as entitlement, someone intervened. Not for recognition. Not for praise. Just because some promises required daily renewal. Some wounds required daily tending. Some people required daily reminders that they mattered even when the world tried to convince them otherwise. Power screamed. Authority whispered. And sometimes the quietest interventions were the ones that changed everything. Subscribe for more stories where justice doesn't need an audience. Where healing matters more than revenge. Where the people who truly change the world aren't the ones with the loudest voices. They're the ones who show up. Who intervene. Who remind us that power isn't about domination. It's about protection. And sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is see someone who's been invisible. And refuse to look away.